Hello, welcome. I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm focusing on the full moon in Capricorn on the 24th of June. But of course, I like to look at, well, in this case, a full moon in the context of whatever else is going on, all the other alignments and generally the picture of the cosmos at that time. But before I get going on all of that, I just want to say a word about the new video that I'm bringing out at the end of the month. Some of you may already have noticed that I've been talking about it in the descriptions that go with this, with my videos, but it has been delayed, and not just because of retrograde Mercury. And so if you are already a subscriber, you'll get your notification the minute it hits the airwaves. And if you haven't yet subscribed, can I please ask you to do that? Not only because you will get those notifications, but also I think it's sort of supporting the spread of good astrology. And if you like this kind of astrology, it's good to, spread it around a bit. This is what we need to encourage people to see, what a beautiful thing astrology is. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get on with what's going on. Now, in fact, in this a period of time, and we're looking at the full moon on the 24th of June, if we go back a few days to the 21st of June, we have the arrival of the sun in Cancer. Now, that's a really important astrological moment. It's not only the fact that it marks the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere and the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere, but it's one of 4 ingress charts that happens during the course of any year. And ingress charts are particularly interesting to us astrologers who really like mundane astrology. We want to look what's going on in the world. And these 4 charts, the Aries ingress, March 21st, the Cancer ingress, 21st of June, the Libra ingress, the 20th of September, and finally the Capricorn ingress, 21st of December, around that time. These, according to where you set up that chart for the capital of any country, gives you a kind of little image of what the next quarter is going to be like. And so I'm really going to start off with that, and we'll get onto the full moon shortly after. So let's take a look at what this ingress chart looks like for the USA. I've set this for Washington because it is the capital of the USA. And what you can see instantly is a big square in the middle of the circle. That's very important. I'll come to that in a second. But you can really read a mundane chart kind of like a natal chart belonging to a person. I mean, the houses roughly mean the same thing, but things like the moon, for instance, we could say that's the mood of the people, the mood of the country, when we're looking at a mundane chart, as opposed to our emotions when we're looking at it in a natal chart. And when it comes to the houses, if we look at the second house, for instance, which in a natal chart we look at for self-worth, which incorporates everything from how people treat us and how we feel about ourselves and what we have to offer. It's also about how much we're worth, what our assets are in terms of finance. So when we look at it from a mundane point of view, the second house in a mundane chart is all about the economy, is about the treasury, is about all things financial. So as we look at this Cancer ingress chart, we see Aquarius is rising. And that makes Uranus the ruler of the horoscope. Of course, Saturn is the co-ruler, the old ruler of Aquarius. So we should consider Saturn as well. And in this chart, Saturn is just above the ascendant, that horizontal line in the center of the circle. And that has an importance too, because not only is Saturn just above the ascendant, which does make it kind of strong and all things Saturnian, to do with the government in this case, to do with rules and law and order, all those kind of things. But Saturn is also caught up in that box configuration. We can see it squaring Uranus, the ruler of the chart, opposing Mars in Leo in the 6th house, and also Saturn is squaring the moon. It's we've got a whole kind of setup here with 4 planets each one of them connecting to the other one. And what we look at when we look at this is a grand cross, we consider it an angle of tension. So even if we don't look very much further in this chart for the next quarter for America, we know it's a very tense period. And I did talk about the moon a little while ago, meaning the mood of the country. So I'm going to say right off the bat here, the mood of the country is rebellious. It's full of protests and argument and upsets. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we look at the chart of the full moon as well. One thing I want to say, we come back to me again, if we think about the summer solstice and we think about the winter solstice, the sun's arrival at 0 degrees of Cancer, the Earth is tilted, or its poles, its North Pole is facing directly towards the sun. That's why it is hot and warm, and the sun is at its most, is at its strongest. And when we think about what that meant in ancient times, and we looked at the festivals and celebrations that happened at the summer solstice, they were very much linked to fertility. The idea that the sun, enables the earth to be fertile, to grow, to feed us, to give us light and heat. Then the celebration of the sun at that time was, is why we have bonfires and maypoles in those ancient ceremonies. But of course, what must be remembered is that at the point that the sun is at its maximum, it begins its decline. And of course, the reverse is the case at the winter solstice, because the Earth then begins to tilt a little bit more towards the sun each day. And so both of them are to do with fertility and the replenishment of the Earth. But that idea that things are changing from that moment is really an interesting thing, isn't it? Because we think about our own lives when perhaps we are at our happiest, that everything is as full as it could be. So often that marks the decline, because that's what life is like. It's this big wave form of desolation to consolation, back to desolation again, happiness to sadness, these great big wave forms that dominate all our lives. So what I want to say is that the very next day, on the 22nd of June, Mercury turns direct. And when Mercury is retrograde, we always complain about the fact we can't get anywhere in a straight line. And we're just constantly faced with delays and detours and diversions. The thing is that when Mercury turns direct again, communications and travel, it doesn't just snap back like elastic. It's going to take perhaps another week or 10 days before things get really ironed out. And I'm quite interested about this because in England, the 21st of June has been designated Freedom Day, because that is when the country is supposed to really come back to what it was before. So everything's open, everybody can go freely anywhere they want within the country. But as I record this, already there are kind of murmurings, and not even murmurings, they're quite loud, that this may not in fact happen on the 21st, because of course COVID is still a very real factor to deal with. And so that idea of Mercury snapping back doesn't mean necessarily that we'll get freedom and all communications will be ironed out after that point. I think it's going to take just a little bit longer. So let's get on to our full moon. And here is the chart of that full moon. And I've set this from Rome, Italy, mainly because I wanted to show the moon rising, well, sort of rising, on that 9 o'clock point of the chart, and the sun at the very opposite point. So you could see that that's what a full moon is. It's the sun opposing the moon. The moon being in Capricorn means that it's in Capricorn for all of us. This full moon is a Capricorn full moon. So we put these ideas together and we think about a full moon being closure and completion. Often at a full moon, well, the sun and the moon are at their furthest distance apart. So sometimes Things get very polarized at a full moon. But also it's at that point that we can acquire union as well. So we need to think of both those things in terms of any full moon. But when we think of Capricorn, the sign, we're thinking about the sign of responsibility, of order, of structure, of things being, put in place and in a very kind of practical way. I always think when I look at a chart of somebody with a moon in Capricorn, I always think, oh, that's a very hard working moon. Those people who have a moon in Capricorn work very hard, and they work hard not just necessarily at what they do in life, but also they work very hard on their emotions, and that sometimes they make hard work of their emotions. So we can see with this full moon in Capricorn, we've got this sort of theme of older people. Saturn rules Capricorn. We're often to do with age and time when we look at this sign and that planet. So older people are going to be perhaps of special interest at this time of the full moon, whether that means the older generation in our families, or whether we've got all sorts of things happening in regard to the older generation. And also we think about, the age-related things, age-related concerns. They're going to be a big feature of this full moon in Capricorn. Now, let me come back. I'll stay a little bit more while we look at this chart, because what I want you to see there is, if you remember, in the chart of the Cancer ingress, we had that big square box in the, cross in the circle. Here we've now got a triangle, because the moon was part of that grand cross, and it's no longer part of that at the full moon. It's not engaged in that configuration. So we have what we call a T-square here. So Mars is opposing Saturn, and Uranus is squaring both of them. And why I want you to look particularly at that is, if you look at the degree there of Mars at the time of the full moon, it's about 8 degrees of Leo. And if you look at Saturn at the opposite point, it's 12. And if we look at Uranus, it's 13. So you can see that things are getting tighter and tighter. And that is important, because when this T-square becomes exact, it's going to be in between the 1st of July and the 4th of July. And of course, if you're an American, you know that the 4th of July is Independence Day. It's a huge, big celebration for all America. But hello, when we look at that and we see that T-square, we have to know that things are going to be very tense and not at all easy in America around the time of Independence Day. And I talked about the mood of the people being protesting and being aggravated. And we can see that all sorts of aggravating protests, violence, upsets are increasingly likely to be happening as we get to that 4th of July, 1st of July period. The other thing that I talk about a lot, when we look at full moons, we look at the new moon before it. Now, I'm not talking about the new moon that happened 2 weeks before this full moon. I'm talking about the new moon in Capricorn. If we come back, we leave our chart for a minute, come back to me in the room, so to speak. When we go back in time to the new moon in Capricorn, we're going back to the 13th of January this year. So these time periods are linked. And in reference to the idea of America, Independence Day, and what's going to happen around that period, if we think back, we know that around the 6th of January, on the 6th of January, we had the storming of the Capitol building. And of course, right through up until the inauguration, there was a lot of tension and upset in the country. And I think we hark back to that. These two time periods are connected. And in your own lives, obviously, particularly if you have a Capricorn moon, or if you're a Cancer or a Capricorn, these time periods may be particularly important to you. And we think often of a new moon, what began at that time? And all of us can do this, regardless of whether we've got a moon in Capricorn, we are Capricorns or whatever. We can just think to that period of time and think, did we begin anything at that time? Did something happen at that time? Because 6 months down the line, we've got an echo, something taking us back to that period. Now, because a full moon is all about completion and closure, we've got the idea that maybe something that began in that January period is now completed. It's done. And as I always say, the easiest thing to think about really is sometimes a relationship. If we begin a relationship around the time of a new moon, when that new moon becomes a full moon in that sign, we reach a stage of that relationship whereby we say, are we really in this for the long term, or was it just one of those things? So these are the kind of ideas and connections you should be making to this full moon, and in fact, wherever your natal moon is or whatever your sun sign, but particularly if you're a Cancer and Capricorn. Now, in fact, if I look at the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, for Cancer, the full moon means the relationship axis and the 7th house is really being brought out into the full moonlight, if you like. So we've got a relationship issue here. So is it time to make the ties that bind, or is it time to cut the ties that bind? And that's what you're playing with, whether you're a Cancerian or a Capricornian. Now, there are two ways to look at this, because if you're a Cancerian, the sun is in your sign. So you are emboldened and empowered in the real world way. The sun's beams are on you, so you get to stand up for what you believe in, stand up for what you want to say and do in regard to relationship matters. And that extends out to things to do with companies. If you're working with a company, or you've got a contract with a company or a business partnership, same thing. You're still looking at contracts, and because the sun is in your sign, you're the one who's emboldened. Now with Capricorn, it's in reverse, because the moon is in your sign, the sun in the opposite sign, in the area of other people. So other people are strutting their stuff. And in a way, it's you who are reflecting, not just reflecting what's going on, but also considering how you feel about it. This is a feeling moon, Capricorn. So you're making judgments and decisions based on how you feel. Now, if we look at Aries and Libra, who are the other two cardinal signs, then we're also looking at an important full moon. For Aries and for Libra, we're on the axis of life direction. So we've got home and family, the roots of life, the basis upon which we build our future. And we've got the idea of being out in the world, our place in the world in the sense of our place in society, our place on the world stage. So Aries and Libra are playing around with this dynamic. And I often think when we're looking at this full moon, at this period of the year, it's about work-life balance in its simplest, interpretation. Because I think all of us, we have different parts of our lives, and some of us are very career oriented, or we have a very important social life or whatever we're doing. And that can take us away from our home, our family, and the need to be nurturing and to find sanctuary. And there needs to be a balance between these two things. You can't have one overbalancing the other. And that's what this full moon is all about. It's about getting that balance back into your life. Now, coming back to our kind of astrological calendar, on the 25th of June, the day after the full moon, Neptune turns stationary retrograde. Now, during the time it's stationary, which was at least a week, if not a little bit longer before that, and a little bit after, this stationary period makes, or when I say make, it makes it sound as though there's a force going on, but what we understand as astrologers when we're looking at a stationary planet and looking at the events that are going on at that time, it's as though the planet is super powerful. Its properties are very front forward in life. And so with Neptune, we have a lot to do with health and healing. We have a lot to do with social services, spiritual matters, even the arts. So when Neptune is stationary, these kind of areas of life come very much to the foreground. Now, I've also done a lot of work with the coronavirus and have given it a Neptune signature. So I think there are going to be some big developments around the whole coronavirus pandemic situation around that period. And when we think about a full moon, we think about that Cancer ingress. And let's not forget that when we look at the sun's arrival in Cancer, which forms the basis for an ingress chart, every country in the world will have that Grand Cross, every country. But it depends, it's going to be in different parts of the horoscope. So there's different tensions in different countries for different reasons. But if I go back and I think about, I was talking about Great Britain and the idea that Freedom Day is supposed to be, as the time I'm recording this, supposed to be the 21st of June. When we take all these things into consideration, Neptune stationary retrograde, the signature of the coronavirus, and we think about Mercury having just gone direct, so many indications here that things are far from the way they should be. And so yes, I mean, several things to think about here. I don't necessarily want to get into what Neptune turning stationary retrograde means for all of us. My goodness, we'd be here for, 2 hours. But it's things to watch out for, things that somehow seem to be a little unreal. And we might kind of say to ourselves, what was that? What is going on? Why is there so much confusion in the world? Why is there so much confusion in our lives? So these are the kind of things that a Neptune stationary retrograde will bring to mind. Now, if you remember, when I looked at that ingress chart and also on the full moon chart, I looked at the process, where Mars was at the time of the full moon, about 8 degrees of Leo. But of course, it's advancing forwards and it will be exactly opposed to Saturn on the 1st of July, and then it will be square Uranus on the 4th of July. And I've already kind of mentioned that, so I'm not going to go back into it again. But I think if we think about our individual lives, I mean, we all have this dynamic in our charts somewhere. And if it's making a connection to one of our personal planets or points, we are, as I speak to you, feeling very frustrated. There are a lot of things that aren't as we would like them. And it seems in a funny kind of way, we're sort of powerless to do anything about it. Now, of course, this is the dynamic of the Saturn-Uranus square. And I talked about that on my last video. I talked about the idea that Saturn represents restriction. It represents the things that are the ring past not, what we can't move or budge, what's been history, if you like, and in place for a long time. That's Saturn. Uranus is all about the new, the different. Let's break through, let's go forward. Let's be progressive. Let's get into the space age. That's Uranus talking. But if we look, I talked on my last video about this dynamic, meaning all of us in our own ways need to take accountability for things that we've done in the past, accountability for things that we do in the present. Remember, we are constantly creating new karma. So the idea of taking accountability for our actions is very important when we look at Saturn and its place in a big configuration like the Saturn-Uranus square. But what I think, when we think about Uranus representing liberation, breaking through the chains, it's almost as though by taking accountability for things we've done in the past or what we're doing right now, we experience a release. And I think that is the very positive side of, that Saturn-Uranus dynamic, which is, to be really, really honest, it's a very difficult dynamic. So I want to wind up this, this video, and what I was thinking of as I was, putting my ideas together, and it relates to the work that I'm doing at the moment, and the work, I would say, over the last, 2 months that I've been dealing with my clients all over the world in different walks of life. But the theme that is constant is how so many of them are coming up against situations that are not of their own making. And they are baffled by what's happening. In some cases, it's kind of outrageous misfortune with no basis in truth at all. They're being accused of things they never did. For others, it's not quite anything like that, but it's as though while formerly they were always able to influence their lives, they had strategies in place, and they would always work their way through situations and come out the other side. But it's as though this isn't working, so that everything some of my clients are trying is just coming up against brick walls. Nothing is working. And of course, what is the logical conclusion you make from that? Well, aside from the fact, maybe astrology can show me what's going on. And yes, astrology is a wonderful monitor and a reflection. It's wonderful to look at your life or what's going on in the world out there with astrology as the narrative that goes with that, because you understand so much more about why things are the way they are. But the other thing that it leads to, apart from reaching for your direct line to your astrologer, is the idea that, I've never been in a situation like this. This is relentlessly difficult, or this is not of my making. The next logical step for a lot of people is, you know what? I've been spooked. Someone's swizzling their nose, and, maybe there's a hint of magic around, and that this is what's going on. It's got nothing to do with normal life or normal circumstances. It's kind of out there. Well, I want to set your mind at rest. No, it's not there. Somebody isn't swizzling their nose and making bad things happen. It's always, as we go through our difficult times, whether they last 3 months or 3 to 4 years, once everything has changed and we're embarked on a new path, because it's always about that. It's all about the fact we're on the wrong trajectory and that we need to get onto the right trajectory because our life is changing. We need to be somewhere else. Well, we don't see it like that because we haven't got the big map. We're only on the path and being steered by circumstances. But eventually, when we're where we should be, we look back and we see how everything unfolded in the right way. And we also come to terms with the idea that nobody had hexed us at all. It was just the way it was. But without those circumstances, you would never have discovered this, gone there, changed your trajectory at all. And that's really the meaning for it all. And I think if we can realize that our difficult times are not there for always, we're not going to be stuck like this. You know what, used to be a kind of saying that if you pulled a face and the wind changed, you'd be stuck with that face forever. It isn't quite like that. It doesn't mean because things are tough that they won't ever change. I promise you, they absolutely will change. And it's when a series of steps have been accomplished by you and also by the hands on the cosmic clock, if you like, that things come together in time. So that about wraps up this video, which I hope you found interesting. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't just yet. And I look forward to being here for you again in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you for watching. Take care.